Alrighty there. Welcome back to Unsafe Spaces. I'm Randy Cross here with you, taking you through this week's edition of what we have for you in the world of news and sports and entertainment and the strange part of the world news. And, it's going to be a lot of fun. I think this was a week that had a lot of pretty amazing stories involved in it. Some were sports related, some obviously weren't. One of the things that really comes to mind initially was some of the non-sports stories, especially the idea of the terror in London again. This time it was a little bit different in that it involved a van driving on the sidewalk after a midnight service in a mosque in London.
There it is right there.
And it happened
London
to
police,
be...
according to BNO News, London police say, and Sky News, van plowed into pedestrians as worshippers were leaving a mosque. That suggests this could be targeted at Muslims. Now, let me say...
It looked straight like it was towards Muslims. It was basically the target that people were going to walk up.
He basically drove on the pavement, coming straight towards all the Muslims. And as he's coming to them, he hit all of them.
And just to remind people, just like you can't label every single Muslim by the acts of the 10% or so that are radicalized, want to inflict Sharia law on everybody, I guess this is kind of a reminder that, the crazy people that have it out for people can't also be labeled with any other particular group. Very unfortunate case, and unfortunately, that and the happenings in Belgium at the train station and what went on in Paris, it just seems Europe is just a constant cycle of these things happening over and over again. Number 2 on the weekly list, Otto Warmbier, the 22-year-old U.S. citizen who had gone to North Korea. God, it sounds strange to say as a tourist, but sort of as a tourist, and wanted to take down a poster as a souvenir, and was sentenced to 15 years hard labor. Well, President Trump and his Secretary of State, Tillerson, were able to get Warmbier out of North Korea, and he was sent home. Well, unfortunately, he had suffered massive brain damage. He was in a coma and subsequently died just a couple days ago. And it's, again, another sad, sad story that really has nothing good will come of this. The Warmbier family are out of sun. Everyone looks bad here. But the worst look is the fact that this kid sat there for 16 months and no one until this administration got in was able to make any headway and get him released. And no one knew that he'd been injured. So it's just terrible. And the sports side of life, this is a great week in golf. Last week was. The U.S. Open happened at Erin Hills in Wisconsin. First time in Wisconsin that a major event had been held there in the state. They did a fantastic job. The course looked, for a U.S. Open, sufficiently punitive and ridiculous at times as far as how hard it was. But those guys aren't normal golfers. It was a lot of fun to watch, and having Brooks Koepka of Jupiter, Florida win that thing was fun to see. Good young player, and just add him to the list with Dustin Johnson and Jordan Spieth and the rest of them of guys that give golf a lot of things to look forward to now that Tiger Woods and his domination is clearly a thing of the now distant past. The NBA Finals went on this past week, and the Golden State Warriors in Game 5 took the title over the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James. Curry, Durant, Thompson, Green. It was a soup to nuts win. And I think those two teams are everything that's really good about pro basketball and really bad about pro basketball. They play at a hugely high level. They are really, really good. But they're about the only two teams at this point that are truly kind of super teams. And it tells you a little bit about the NBA setup when right as soon as this final was over, all everyone could talk about is how do you build another super team, add to Cleveland so they can challenge Golden State, so that make their super team just a little more super, or more super than the other. I'm getting confused. But anyway, it was fun to watch. Next up on this list, here in Georgia yesterday, the Georgia 6th District congressional vote was yesterday, where Karen Handel won that congressional seat. She's now Congresswoman Karen Handel over John Ossoff, the Democrat. $50+ million spent in advertising and everything else during this election. And again, the polls were wrong. Again, the mainstream media was way off base and very, very wrong. They got to do some navel searching, contemplating the old navel, and figure things out. I mean, you can't always be this wrong. They're not polls if they're always wrong. You've got to really fix that, because this ended up being not that close. 5-6% was a pretty convincing win from the standpoint of, it wasn't a week ago that supposedly Handel was behind by 10%. Just to give you a point of reference on the $50+ million, Meals on Wheels, a fabulous charity, and their Georgia chapter here has a budget less than $11 million a year to feed elderly, to feed kids, to feed people that really are going hungry. Because contrary to what people want to think, there are plenty of people in our country that are going hungry. And Meals on Wheels in Georgia has a budget of less than $11 million. And they just spent $50 on a congressional seat that pays, what, $175,000 a year? How asinine is that? And how out of whack are your priorities? I don't know. That makes zero sense to me. And just a real close up to last week, got to close with the shooting of Representative Steve Scalise. He's now doing much better. He was the majority whip in Congress, was shot by a radical Democrat, liberal, whatever you want to call this guy. I will not say his name. He doesn't deserve to be mentioned. All that I will say about what he did is no one should ever do that. It's inexcusable. And hopefully Steve Scalise gets better very, very quick. All right, now I'll move on to sort of what's bothering me this week. And there's somebody I want to talk about in that regard, and I've had less than glowing things to say about Colin Kaepernick in the past. I've gone out of my way, actually, to say bad things about Colin Kaepernick in the past, because I did not agree with how he was going about getting his message out. His message was 100% correct, but what he was doing, either kneeling or whatever during the national anthem, wasn't the proper way to go about doing it. Well, he's not a 49er. Not only that is he not a 49er, he's not a professional football player anymore. And it's gotten to be very, very clear that he won't be in the future, both by the fact that no one's interested in signing him and the fact that now he's acting more like an activist than he is an athlete. And if he wants to make that transition, he'll have more time to study his delivery. He'll have more time to study, how he wants his message delivered. He's raised like 700,000 plus of $1 million goal. So in that regard, you've got to say congratulations to him. I wish him the best of luck, because you are not, it looks like, going to get a job in the NFL. And that's all the fault's your own by the way you delivered your message. You alienated yourself. But I don't find much wrong with what Kaepernick did outside of that. The game needs guys like him. The game needs quarterbacks. I think as a backup quarterback, just to get slightly into the weeds here, he's the perfect quarterback for almost any team you have, because you know what he can do well. And if your starter gets hurt and you know he can do what he does, why in the hell would you not want him as a backup? Now, I understand, is he going to be disruptive? Is he going to do the kneeling on the sideline? I understand that part, but from a football sense, I think the guy would make an excellent backup quarterback, if not eventually, again, a very good starter. But as I mentioned earlier, by his actions, it would appear he's pretty committed to the fact that he wants to be an activist. So good luck to you on that, is all I'm really going to say. You'll need all the luck in the world. The activist business is a lot tougher than the athlete business. Next up in our group of things I want to talk about here after Kaepernick is we get towards our butt hurt of the week. We all love that, the butt hurt of the week. I look forward to that every week, and I hear that music. Oh, that makes me sit up straight every time I see that picture. But our butt hurt of the week, we're going to start with a guy. It's hard to say a guy's butt hurt if he plays a game, especially a game like golf, a country club sport, for a living. Rickie Fowler. What a player. What a player. But as that headline says, and I agree 100%, man, this guy just doesn't get it done. Day one, he's leading. Day two, he kind of does okay. Day three, he does only okay. Day four, he never really closes. I was struggling to find out what it is about his game that to me said, okay, what is Rickie lacking? What is his problem? And all of a sudden I said, I've got it. I went to Major League 2, that wonderful movie. Well, not wonderful, but it's very memorable. Almost as good as Major League 1.
You have no.
Come on, you got it.
You have no.
Yeah?
Marbles.
That's it.
Marbles? Marbles. You have no marbles.
That's Rickie Fowler's problem. Rickie's got no marbles. When he's got to be able to just get it together, drop a pair, and play under pressure his best, be that great player everybody expects, he can't do it. You know, Nicholas could, Palmer could, Dustin Johnson did it last year. Brooks Koepka did it this year. Every year in a major, somebody does it every time. But that's just something right now that Rickie Fowler, he dresses good. He's wonderful at commercials. He's really good at his charitable work in the community. But I have to say, as of right now, not only is he butthurt, he's got no marbles. None, zero, no marbles. Next up on the list, Andre Ward and Sergey Kovalev fought last Saturday night. It was the second of what will probably undoubtedly be a trilogy of fights because they're going to have another fight. You can put that in the bank. Ward did hit Kovalev with a pretty good shot. And then he followed that up with 3 low blows. I'll be nice and I'll say that. Because my note after going over that fight just said simply, ain't that a smack in the sack? Because that's basically what Andre Ward did a couple times to Kovalev. And they called that a TKO. So I'm butthurt over that. I'm butthurt for everybody that paid all that money to see a non-knockout knockout. Because when you smack a guy down there a couple of times, yeah, he can't go on. But that's not knocking him out. Come on. Next up, Gene Simmons and Kiss. We're all familiar with Gene. There he is. He's got his own reality show. He's had everything. But the University of Texas president has made the point that you can't trademark that signal. See that sign where he's got his pinky finger and his index finger up and the other 2 fingers down? This one right here. Now that is hook 'em. I should know that because I work with Brian Jones, who went to the University of Texas. And he does that all the time. Now, Gene Simmons wants to trademark that with the thumb out, I guess. That's his variance in the whole thing. But the University of Texas has made the point that, no, you can't do that. And we have been using that since the 50s. So I think Gene Simmons right now, he and Kiss will have to be just a little bit butthurt about the fact that they've lost that one. Now, expensive butthurt will be how you should refer to our next story, which is DraftKings in the fantasy sports realm and FanDuel, who control 90% of fantasy sports. You think of that, 90% are those two companies. Now, they want to merge. They want to become one company. Well, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has decided that they think that's a bad idea. And if they go ahead with it, they've told them they will block it. 90%. Now, when you think about it, it's bad business from the FTC's perspective that two companies would merge and control 90% of fantasy sports as far as the fantasy part of it online and whatnot, both daily, gambling. It's gambling. The hell, I'm not going to BS you. It's gambling. You can do it from a daily standpoint. You can do it from a weekly standpoint. You can get into leagues and season long. So those two companies who control 90%, they can't join up and control 100% of it. But the individual leagues own 100% of their business. And they also have a lot of fantasy sports involved in what they do. So it'll get a little sticky. But as of right now, FanDuel and DraftKings, they are butthurt because they won't be merging according to the FTC. That's something that, to me, I love fantasy sports. I think it's fantastic. The more, the better. And I think all these lines are going to become more and more blurred as we get closer to the inevitable time when every sport has a presence in Las Vegas. Hockey's starting next year. The NFL will be in there by, 2019, 2020, when the Raiders get to Vegas. Baseball will be in there. The NBA's already had their All-Star game there a few times. Who's to say there's not going to be an NBA team in Las Vegas? And then, watch out. Then the lid comes off. And then I think these leagues are going to have to be a lot more cognizant of how they control their sports, especially their athletes, as it relates to people getting in their business, especially the guys that control betting lines and things like that. All right. Well, let's go from butthurt, because that's it for butthurt for the week. And we'll go into the real world news we have working. All right, number one on the real world news list for us this week was Shakespeare in the Park. Sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? Well, this one, it was about Julius Caesar. Not really Julius Caesar. It was more kind of about Donald Trump. And if you're familiar with Shakespeare's version of Julius Caesar and the real story of Julius Caesar, it doesn't end well for the main character. Julius Caesar, thanks to Brutus and the rest of his friends, was stabbed to death in the Roman Forum right there, and didn't go well. And in the play, Donald Trump is severely knifed, very bloody, kind of macabre ending to this play that has had conservatives, to use a term from the last segment, butthurt about what's going on. Now, actually, conservatives kind of grew a pair and decided that they do a little protesting themselves. And as of this last few nights, last 3 or 4 days, they have actually interrupted some of the performances, protesting the fact that, this violence is being perpetrated against a character who's the president of the United States. All I'm going to say about this is, not a good look, probably. I'm a big respecter of First Amendment rights. Yes, you have the right to say that. Yes, you have the right to remain silent. Yes, you have the right. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the Mirandas. I just think if you're going to have the consequences involved in free speech and accept the consequences, you've got to be able to accept the fact that when you make these kind of statements, you're going to torque some people off. And the protests come with it. deal with it. Don't complain about it. Just deal with it. Number 2 in our real world news is something in the sporting world that's going to be coming up Thursday night, and I can't wait until this is here. I can't wait till this is over, and it's the NBA draft. Now that the NBA Finals is over, this week it's the NBA draft, and the big story around the draft this week was not only the supposed chance of a trade between the Pacers and the Lakers that would involve a lot of things, but it would not involve the number 2 pick. Supposedly they've offered other stuff and Brandon Ingram to the Pacers for George, but the trade that went on earlier in the week involved the number 1 and the number 3 teams in the draft, the Boston Celtics and the 76ers. They exchanged draft picks. In my opinion, Boston came out with a pretty good deal, and the Sixers will be on top. They've said they're going to draft Fultz, and number 2 will probably be LeVon Ball, who is played at least his freshman year at UCLA. I've got a little soft spot in my heart for. Unfortunately, his representative, his agent, his marketer, his Svengali is his dad, LeVar Ball, who I got to be honest, if it was a matchup between he and Saddam Hussein, I would root my butt off for Saddam Hussein. This guy is just nothing. I just can't stand this guy. But anyway, he'll be the number 2 pick, and then we'll go into summer ball, and then the NBA, relatively irrelevant until later in the year, till they get back into the season, back into their swing, which will be fun to see if they can create any more super teams, but it's going to be hard to do. Again, in the world of sports, some news this week involved the Washington Redskins and Daniel Snyder in the NFL. It wasn't in direct relation to them because there's a group out there, a singing group or a musical group called the Slants, made up of predominantly Asian Americans, who wanted to use that term, that name, and were challenged to use that name. That was part of this lawsuit, that the trademark, that there was a negative connotation, that it just cast a very pale look on the community in general to have a group called the Slants. Hey, I could give you several examples. If you do know any British slang, and you're a big fan of the group Steely Dan, look up Steely Dan and British slang and see what that stands for and see what people might have a little problem with that. But the Slants won their case, basically identical to what Dan Snyder and the Washington Redskins are trying to say about using the Redskins, that it can be thought of as a negative connotation. And in some cases, people consider it an out and out insult to use that name. And there are journalists and other people in the media out there that say they will not use that name. More power to you. That's part of your First Amendment right. But according to the court, you're not going to be able to take them to court and fight that. Next up in the real world news is something near and dear to my heart, and the whole idea of concussions. And sadly, it's a very familiar figure to a lot of people out there. If you enjoyed the old movie The Blind Side, that was the story of Michael Oher, who was homeless at the time, taken in by a family in Memphis, became an offensive tackle for the University for Ole Miss, then was drafted into the NFL. Great story. Well, it's not going to have a happy ending, evidently, because last September, so September of 2016, Michael Oher suffered a concussion. And as of now, he has still not been cleared to play. So, roughly 9 months later, you can't play you haven't recovered from the concussion you got then. You have some lasting issues, which compounds this whole thing. Is the fact that it looks like the Carolina Panthers are going to cut Mike Oher. So they'll relieve themselves of the cap space. They'll relieve themselves of the obligation. And it really depends on how that last contract he wrote, or his agent wrote up, how much of that was actually guaranteed as to what he will get financially. But we perhaps have seen the last of one of the great stories in sports over the last decade or so, the whole idea of the homeless kid who turned his talents around, turned his life around, and protected that blind side, not only in college at Ole Miss, but also in the NFL. It looks like Michael Oher is done playing football. A sad note to end this whole thing, and the real note in the real world, there is a boxer who, by the name of Tim Hague, who was a UFC MMA fighter before he was a boxer. And in his last fight, he suffered a KO, a knockout, and he died. He was fighting Adam Braidwood up in Alberta, Canada, and he died. Now, in studying this case, you see him go down and kind of the head slaps down. He's out before he ever hits the ground. And the way his arms react, you can tell. But you study this guy's case 8 times in MMA, UFC. 8 times he was knocked out, unconscious. That was the second time he'd been knocked unconscious in boxing. You don't think we need regulation in all sports, especially these sports? You know, what happened to the old you can't fight for 6 months if you're knocked out? Why isn't that mandatory in every state? Why aren't cognitive testings mandatory in every state? Well, it's too late. Too late for Tim Hogue. But it's, or Hague. It's a sad story, and we wish his family only the best, and thoughts and prayers go out to he and the whole community he's involved with at a time like this. Now, at the very end of the real world sports issues here, I came across a story on Science Daily, which is a website that basically features all science stories. And I saw this, and it really jumped out at me. And it said that 19-year-olds are just as sedentary as 60-year-olds. And a little piece of me said, now wait a minute, that can't be right. I mean, 19-year-olds, they're active as heck. Well, maybe not.
That means it's time to get up.
Waking up this morning was horrible. What do you really need to do that early in the morning?
What time is it?
It is 7 o'clock.
That is not my time to wake up.
It is in this house. It is in this house.
I was trying to be because they expect me to wake up so early, and that just does not fly with me.
Oh, I think I just broke my nail. Oh my God.
You broke a nail?
Hold on. I'm starting to sweat. Isn't that like a sign for you to stop? No. Isn't that like really unhealthy?
No, darling, it's not a sign for you to stop or that it's really unhealthy. It's interesting in this study, and this is a very serious study, and it tells you something that I think as grandparents, as parents, as whatever you want to say, you know, young people need to be active. They need to get the hell out of the house. You know, the console, the box, the game, the TV, whatever, that needs to be turned off. They've never heard the words that we grew up with. Your parent would look at you and say, go play. And that just meant get out of the house, go find some friends, and do something. You know, and that's kind of how we spend our summers. That's how we spend our time off. But get outside and play. And when you've got 19-year-olds that are just as sedentary as 60-year-olds, man, that is a sad, sad something to look at. I mean, the only group where the activity actually goes up the entire decade are the 20-somethings. So after sitting on their ass for the first 19 years of their life, I guess when they get out and about and they get to college and they first get to work and somebody buys them their first Fitbit they can play with and pay attention to how many steps they take, people get active. But this is not a good sign for us as a species if we're getting less active, because lumps don't do well health-wise. That'll do it for our real world news. I've got a couple of stories here I wanted to drop on you just by way of just kind of three for the road. Let's call it that. Number one on the list. One of the fun guys to watch play football in the NFL. A guy who's now known by one word and is a name. It's actually a name and an action verb. Gronk. You can go out and gronk. You can gronk out. You can do the gronk. You can do all sorts of fun Gronk stuff. Let me read you a few things here. The Gronk had a little bit of a party. Now, he contends that he actually spent this much. But according to this club that he was at, there was a place called The Shrine at Foxwoods Resort, which is in Connecticut. He rang up a $100,000 plus tab, which involved, 160 bottles of champagne, 18 of which were Ace of Spades Rosé. 15 bottles were Dom Perignon Rosé. So the Dom Perignon ran him about $27,000 total, and the Ace of Spades was $18,000 total. But I always thought rosé was kind of code for slightly pinkish color, lots of sugar, and basically the crappiest kind of wine or champagne you can get. But anyway, he spent a lot of money on that, but also drank a bunch of grapes, 16 bottles of Grey Goose, 45 orders of Maker's Mark, shots of Jim Beam Fire, 3 bottles of Don Julio 1942, which, as an aside, quality tequila. You ought to try that. 1942, very good. And they just weren't messing around. Quite a time for Gronk. And you know what? This kind of publicity probably drives Bill Belichick a little bit crazy, but you can't help but love this kid because he performs on the field. He performs off the field. Has he been hurt the last few years at times? Yes. But as they break down and get older, athletes get hurt more. So Gronk may be preparing for his after football life, and hopefully somebody out there has been preparing him for that after football life. But good on you, Gronk. Have fun. Season's going to start in August. Second story here. Hendersonville, North Carolina. Ray, who works on this podcast, just drove through Hendersonville, North Carolina on his way down into the Atlanta area earlier this morning. And why did I mention Henderson, North Carolina, you might ask? Well, there's a story that went on. A poor gentleman had to call the police because, well, I'll let the story basically tell itself. This guy by the name of David Chavez is now in Hendersonville, North Carolina police custody. A local farmer caught him having inappropriate relations on his property. The farmer heard his pig squealing loudly and went to the back area of his property because he thought wild dogs might be trying to hurt his pig. Turns out that squealing had nothing to do with wild dogs, or not non-human wild dogs. He was confused. So he called the police and told them to please meet him out in the back of his farm. Well, he caught this guy having relations with his pig. And they were, for those of you that have seen the same sort of action going on with dogs, you remember seeing where dogs get stuck? Well, this guy and this pig got stuck making bacon. And they separated him. He was taken into custody. And his first words afterwards were, "I love her. I wasn't hurting her." He later told police that he believed the pig was his soulmate from a previous life. Well, Chavez is currently being charged with indecent exposure and cruelty to animals. And one look at that mugshot tells you, yeah, that's about right. That's about where he should be. Now, I want to put you onto a story before we go away here of perseverance, reacting to adversity, how you deal with negatives in your life. And this comes from the world of sports. There's a running back who didn't quite make it in the NFL by the name of Isaiah Peed. Was a pretty good college football player, was very quick. I remember watching him. Was fast, just cut on a dime, had some pretty amazing running talent. Well, he unfortunately rolled his car over. As you can see, it was quite a mess. And he got into this accident. He lost his leg. So he could not play anymore. And you would think that that would be an excuse to sort of curl up into the fetal position for a while and go away. I implore you, if you can't find this story, Google Isaiah Peed and you'll come across this story. And you look and you see how this kid has reacted to this break in his life. It sounds strange, but getting in that accident and losing his leg might have been the best thing that ever happened to this kid. I wish him the best of luck. I want to say, God bless you, Isaiah Peed. And we need more people to react to adversity the way you have, because you've done one amazing job of coming back from what most people would have to consider is the absolute lowest depths you could try to recover from. Being a world-class athlete and losing your leg. And he's come back, roaring back. And congratulations to Isaiah Peed. Hey, that'll do it. Before we hit to our happy trails, I want to remind you, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud. See all those logos? You can find us all there at that same place. And if you have any suggestions, you have any notes, you got any stories you want to send to us, send them to producer@unsafespacesusa.com. All right? Well, we're at the end. That's it for us. And that for me means it's time to hit the happy trails.
Happy trails to you until